This episode of Whitecap is brought to you by North Sails. With North Sails, you can trust our commitment to quality, durability, and unparalleled craftsmanship. Revolutionize the cruising experience with 3DI Ocean. Our ocean sails offer a level of performance and durability that goes beyond the realm of racing. This versatile range of 3DI Ocean sails caters to boats of all sizes, providing them with the advantages of 3D molded composite sails meticulously engineered for long-lasting performance and user-friendliness. Prepare to harness the wind and embark on unforgettable journeys. Whatever you sail, wherever you sail, North Sails has you covered. Connect with our crew today. Hey, welcome to Whitecap, the Canadian Sailing Podcast. I'm Dave Krypton, longtime dinghy sailor and passionate fan of Canadian sailing. Today on the pod, I'd like to welcome incoming CEO of Sail Canada, Ryan Kelly. Ryan is a lifelong sailor, having worked in support of the Sea Cadets program, president of Sail Newfoundland from 2012 to 2020, and as a Sail Canada learning facilitator. He's been a dinghy coach, skiff sailor, and continues to develop as an offshore sailor with the wildly successful Bella J program in Halifax. His most recent day job was as special advisor to the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture for the province of Nova Scotia. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Dave. Pleasure to chat with you today. And I feel I'm on the cusp of celebrity status making it on this podcast. This is a big deal for me. So thanks for having me today.
I love it when people have listened and like it and everything. So thanks for that. So I have to say, when you got the gig as CEO, there was a lot more chatter from my contacts in the sport. People that wouldn't even usually care that much about Sail Canada leadership, but I don't know if it's an East Coast thing or I'm just getting older, but I feel like a lot of the dinghy sailors and racers, I just feel like kind of one of us is now, going to be in there and have kind of a new perspective on the job. So I'm glad you're there, and a lot of my friends are too.
Well, thanks so much, Dave. No, I appreciate that, and yeah, I'll be honest. The responses have been pretty overwhelming. I approach this job with absolute humility. There's this chair has been in existence for a long time. The Canadian Yachting Association has been around for a long time. There's been some pretty big players that have filled the role as CEO, and so when I got the nod, I was really taken back, to be honest. The response from the sailing community across the country, in particular the East Coast, has been great.
Excellent. So we're going to do some short answer questions.
Of course.
Some of them are very controversial, like this first one. Ready? Okay. Donair or cod au gratin?
Ooh, I'm going Donair. I have to stick with my Halifax roots on that one. Pizza
Okay.
Corner. Pizza Corner. I spent some time there growing up, if you're familiar with it. And I gotta rep the home team here.
Okay, good. So as a skiff guy, if we were to start a whole new fleet of training beginner youths, like starting from scratch, would you want to stick with Opties or go to the open skiffs?
Ooh, now you're picking fights with me here, Dave.
Well,
I think I'm a little less fussed on Opti versus open skiff, and a little bit more on the building blocks to make the jump into. I'm assuming we're talking 29er here. I am of the opinion that if only a couple of months in a slow double-handed boat really gives the foundation to make that transition. That could be an FJ, that could be a 420 club or international. And just getting a sense of what it's like to trim a jib while not surviving downwind. I've found some benefits there, so I do love the question. But I don't want to pick a favorite on the development.
No,
class.
Absolutely. I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. We got a fleet of them of open skiffs at my home club in Shediac, and the kids did not take to them really, which is not what I've heard. And I just think it was new and stuff like that. But there certainly is that skiff vibe. Like, you're not sitting down on that boat, just like you're not sitting down on any skiff. Really, it's not like a chill experience. It's like surfing or something.
it's a fun entry point, but the fundamentals of how to sail versus the fundamentals of how to sail fast and really manage power, in my mind, are almost two separate things. So yeah, I can appreciate, depending on the time of year, the open Vic would be a lot,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And I mean, that's probably a beautiful Labor Day weekend boat of like, you're going to go for a swim and sail a little bit, as opposed to the Opti, you can start in March or April if you really want to be hardcore about it, just have the right wetsuit on. So yeah, it's just two different sets of skills in my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, and now I've made this a long answer question, but I've always said that if you can sail on Opti fast upwind, you literally can sail any sailboat on earth fast upwind. So, I've got love for Optis as much as anyone else.
Absolutely.
Um, so next short answer. Okay. Like our hero Mac Moran in the kite foiling fleet, what conditions and fleet lend themselves for you more to go for the glory on a port tack start, or be conservative?
Wow. Ah. I mean, I grew up sailing in St. Margaret's Bay a bit, so I always have a preference for the sea breeze, and I think if you're going to really send it in that nice 10 to 12 knot range, that to me is the sweet spot. If it's patchy, you can really be putting the fate of the race in someone else's hands.
Good. Good. I told you this was going to be controversial. All right. So what is the fastest you think you've ever gone on a sailboat?
In the 49er, I think we got clocked up around 16, 17 at one point. That's unconfirmed, so we're just going to
Yeah,
call that
yeah.
a big fish story, but in that range. And then on Bella J, because you mentioned that up front, I think my top speed on deck with the main sheet in my hand was up around 15 as well.
Okay. Good. Good speeds. Okay. Bucket list of 3 places you'd like to sail in Canada that you haven't yet.
Well, Lake Ontario for starters. I've coached in Lake Ontario, but I haven't actually done a whole lot of sailing myself. And there's a lot of great distance racing going on this coming season, which I'm really excited about. I haven't spent any time in Manitoba, so stretching my legs in Gimli is a place that I want to go. And then I'm actually going to go back to Newfoundland and Labrador. There were a lot of bodies of water up there that I always looked at and said, that looks like it could be great for a skiff, and even more recently, flat water with a whole lot of breeze for a foiling boat. So there's parts of the province. Even though I lived there for 10 years, I didn't get to sail a whole lot. So there's definitely some uncharted territory there.
Okay, so that leads very well into my next question, which was racing in Lake Garda or cruising in Conception Bay.
Oh, racing in Garda.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I have a soft spot for cruising. Don't get me wrong, but I'm a racer through and through.
Excellent. So that's the end of the short answer section. You did very well. I'll give you 10 out of 10. So how did you just in the beginning? How did you get involved in the sport? As a youth sailor.
It was through the Sea Cadet program. So for one, I'll start on sport because I kind of want to separate sport from sailing just for a moment.
Sure.
So I got involved with organized sport when I was 5. Played organized soccer, basketball until everyone had a growth spurt, but me. It feels like over to tennis, and my dad was actually a competitive tennis coach growing up, and so my sister, my brother, all of us, my parents really went out of their way to ensure that we had a proper introduction to organized sport growing up, and I really see the value in sport broadly speaking, just as far as what can it do for you. And I'm of the controversial opinion that the point of playing a sport is not to kick a ball in the back of the net or score a goal. It's the personal growth, it's the professional growth that comes with training and competing at we'll say a high level for the context of this conversation. But for sailing, I grew up in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, not a whole lot of sailing on my side of the harbor, and didn't get exposed to the sport until a little bit later on. So when I joined the Sea Cadet program through the recommendation from a neighbor down the street, I discovered sailing through that, and I really fell in love with the sport. And To be able to do one, or sorry, to be able to sail in the Sea Cadet program also meant that I really had to throw myself into the Sea Cadet program itself to be successful in that endeavor. But make no mistake that my mind was always on the water and ways for me to get to go sailing and subsequently coaching through the Sea Cadet
If I
program.
if I stopped you there for a sec, what other thing I haven't even thought? Do sea cadets? Is there other like what else do they do besides learn to sail? Like what are the other kind of parts of the curriculum? I guess of sea cadets.
Well, I mean, so I'll bring that to the Canadian cadet program in general. It is the biggest untapped resources for families in Canada, in my opinion. So it's a publicly funded youth program. The Sea Cadet program, or sorry, the cadet program itself is geared for 12 to 18-year-olds. And there's basically any activity that you can think of is somewhere in that realm. So the easiest way to describe it is you go to cadet night, to parade night as it's called in many places on a Tuesday or a Thursday or wherever it is, and they put you through leadership through training, through instructional technique, and they'll teach you how to tie knots or what kind of airplanes the air cadets are flying. And then there's always weekend activity with a band practice or a camping trip or something to that effect. And then during the summer, their summer training centers, they've got a very robust syllabus of programs that you can choose from depending on what element you're in. So for me, it was sailing. For others, it could be gliding, it could be power sailing, it could be mountain biking. You name it. There's a really long list of activities that people can choose from. It's fairly competitive. I'm not going to lie, in its own right, and that's why I say, to be a good sailor in the cadet program, you have to be a good cadet first. But if you earn your way into those training opportunities, then in my mind, the world is your oyster. And when I turned 18, I wanted to continue on, and so I ended up joining Canadian Forces as an officer in what was called the Cadet Instructor Cadre at the time. It's called COATS now. I don't remember what the acronym is. Someone will be mad at me if they hear this later, but whatever. But same thing. It's basically an unarmed branch of the Canadian Armed Forces. So your role as a member is to serve the youth program and the training elements thereof.
So you were, and then so I cut you off. You're about to kind of move into how you became a sailing instructor through that program.
Oh, geez, no, not at all. Um, so I'm now 25 years a sail coach as of this month, which does explain the gray in the hair. So I've been at the youth level in particular. I'll call the Intro to Sail program for a while now. So the goal of the Sea Cadet program is that every Sea Cadet gets the opportunity to sail once a year, and that doesn't matter where you live in Canada or to what level you want to strive for. So we do Intro to Sail program May, June, September, October during the shoulder seasons and in some pretty remote places. And I think probably my favorite part about the program, Dave, is that it does bring the sport to people who wouldn't have otherwise had access to it. So by that I mean West Coast Newfoundland, not a whole lot going on down there, or not a whole lot of youth sailing going on there. Burin, not a whole lot of sailing out going on there. In Moncton, there used to be a sail center, and unfortunately that went away when the pond went away. But through that, so the focus of the summer training program is really to self-generate coaches to run the weekend programs. So coming up through, I was a decent sailor, but when I found coaching, I think I really found something that I was good at, and I really invested a lot of time into my own professional development in that space, and took it quite seriously. So really fascinating for me, quite frankly, to do the intro stuff on the shoulder seasons, and then go to a place called Cornwallis, Nova Scotia, where the sailing school used to be in Annapolis, so in the French Basin, next to a hydroelectric dam, which used to throw all kinds of fish smelling foam at us, depending on the tide.
So wait, that's in the Fundy Bay, like the North Shore?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So yeah, at our peak, as I understood it, we were the largest sailing school in Canada, or at least we were up there. So we would average anywhere between 180 to 220 cadets on the water every day. We had a staff up around 45, more coach boats than I could count, and more sailboats than I care to remember were on my inventory. It was a really really big operation, and it was also a live-in school as well. So every morning we would pile a bunch of kids on the bus and drive 20 minutes down the road to Annapolis, go sailing for the day, and then back on the bus around 5 o'clock and back to the camp. But it was a full end to end program, and what I mean by that is we would have in the early days, white sail, bronze sail, silver. We taught racing, and then all the instructor development elements of that with prereq. So it was a really one stop shop, and also fascinating to see. When the program was firing on all cylinders, we would generate some pretty great sailors. And on the flip side, because it was an incubated system, so we weren't pulling in other sailors from elsewhere. If we started to falter, then we would feel that for a couple of years. So it was a cool place to hang out and teach and learn, and ultimately led to my first real big boy job coming out of university. So when I graduated from SMU, I have a psych degree in arts and didn't really know what I wanted to do with that, and ended up working in Trenton, Ontario for a few years to rewrite the sailing program for the cadet program, along with instructional technique and leadership, and then that led to some other opportunities in getting involved with the Learn to Sail committee and the CanSail panel with Sail Canada. So one led to the other for me.
Were you there then when it? There's so many points I want to go back to there, but were you there when it went from white sail to can sail?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny because we were in a state of change for around 4 years, I want to say, because we rewrote the delivery of how we wanted to implement white sail at our local level. So we were already kind of tinkering with how we were focusing, I'll say. And then to be involved with CanSail writing and then subsequently implementation was just a cool way to see your work in action,
For sure.
and experience change management and what does this new program mean for everyone and what's this new language and all these new tools. But at the end of the day, sailboat's still a sailboat. And so in particular at that grassroots level, we were using a different lesson plan, but at the end of the day, the fundamental building blocks remained fairly consistent, at least at what I'll call the level one side of things, just with a slightly different philosophy.
I could bring you back for an entire podcast about that, I'm sure. It's fascinating, and because it was the time, I grew up through the silver, that 1 through 6, and then I kind of was out of it, and then when my kids went to sailing school, it became the sail can. So it's just an interesting thing to talk about. But like I say, we could go on for hours on that, so I'll leave that where that is. And then I wanted to say a couple of things about the cadet program. One was that the very first, I'm so wild I didn't, because when we've talked before, I didn't know that because I grew up in Moncton, and I didn't know that you knew about the sea cadets in Moncton who sailed on the Petitcodiac, which then disappeared, as you say, when we dammed up the whole thing. But with that in mind, the very first boat I ever sailed on in sailing school in Shediac was a boat that they had bought from the Sea Cadets. When that program ended, they came to our yacht club. So that's my connection to Sea Cadets. And so how is that program different now? Can you still does everyone get to sail one day a year? That whole thing, is that still how does it go now? Sea Cadets.
Yeah, it's, fundamentally the curriculum hasn't changed a whole lot. Coming out of the pandemic, there's what I'll call some workforce development challenges, which they're still working through. As are many programs, they're not immune to it, or sorry, they're not different. But like I said, they're a little bit unique just insofar as they have to self-generate. So it was fascinating. I can't believe I'm going to go on a COVID tangent here for a second, but when the pandemic hit, we, as a group of coaches, both on the cadet side and on the Sail NL side, kind of had to take a step back and go, what does this mean? What happens if we don't train for a year or two, and fundamentally what's going to happen to our base? And we realized that getting, intro to sail youth, hopefully relatively easy from one year to the next. People always want to try sailing for the first time, and hanging on to the already committed and passionate to the sport. I felt as though we'd had enough longevity there, but we were really worried about what happened in the middle. So what happened to those intermediate sail kids? What happened to the bronze kids for those who were of the older program? And predictably, those are the ones that found other sports, and so just that rebuilding that middle piece, I think, is going to take a little while for them. I don't want to speak for their leadership, but there's been a lot of focus, from what I understand, on instructor development, and I would say increasingly so at the provincial level for our PSA partners. Same thing. There's a lot of demand for instructors this year, which I don't necessarily know we were getting in say 21 or 22.
Right, right. I'd love to dive into because for me the growing of the sport in different parts of the country is like of most interest to me. I just decided to have a trophy that my podcast gives away called the Whitecap Cup for diversity and growing the sport in weird places, especially like Sask Sail did this great thing a couple of years ago, sending boats up to what was called Lake Montreal to have First Nations kids learn to sail places the kids said they'd never seen a sailboat before, on that lake. And also the Armdale, the Broader Reach program, but specifically also the Sail Nova Scotia mobile sailing school is unbelievable project to just get people to sail in Antigonish or places that people don't usually get to. So I don't know. I'm just very interested in that kind of thing. So I didn't know the Sea Cadets did that kind of taking sailing to different places that isn't like kind of a normal venue. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and to that point, they've got kind of a dual model that they use. So they've got what I'll call satellite deposits of boats in some pretty rural areas, but they also spend a fair bit of money on buses and instructors to travel or to trailer boats to some interesting spots. And some of my fondest memories growing up, to be honest, were me on a highway with six boats and going to some obscure town that I'd never been to before, and just figuring it out. I ended up in Burgeo, West Coast Newfoundland, which I guarantee you can't find on a map.
Okay.
And it was wild. I pulled into town, not a whole lot of fuss behind it. It's not like I was in a military branded vehicle or anything. It was just in a van with a trailer. Dropped the trailer off at the Coast Guard station there and drove down the street, went to a corner store. And by the time I got there, the guy running the store knew who I was. It was like, you're the guy with the boats.
Yep.
And anyway, we spent 2 days there, and a beautiful place to sail. It's a really protected area, fair bit of breeze. But having the community come out and really celebrate the sport being in that body of water was really fantastic. I mean, every dock had a parent on there just waving hello to their kids, and you don't get that at least in my experience in some of the more urban centers. So it really taught me a lesson about the importance of outreach. And meeting people where they are.
Right. It's such an untapped resource. I mean, the longest coastline in the world, and again, I think how the sport was impacted by COVID, both positively and negatively, could be a third podcast. Like it's kind of and one thing in that mind was how the national team guys went out to, I'm not going to remember, Comax, BC, to find a place that was, kind of remote enough, but also they could get big waves and stuff. Like there are so many places that we could be sailing that we're not. I don't know the whys or the what fors of that, but it's just there are a lot of places we can go. And also the COVID thing, the boating kind of exploded in a lot of places. The industry didn't die like everyone thought, and like everything from my home club, the sailing program went down completely, but some parents kind of got on the water and taught kids to sail. And then down in the squadron, like all the kids, because they couldn't travel and race opties, they were all like sailing wasps for the first time, or windsurfing, or all these things like that. I think that really pushed the foiling program down there as well. So, it's fascinating how COVID changed the sport.
Yeah, and I don't want to hype up the benefits of COVID, not by any means. I don't want to be accused of that here today, but I was at the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron through that. I was coaching Ilkla's that summer, and it was cool to have that much parental and community involvement. And for what it's worth, I do think the pandemic kind of forced us all to slow down, and for sailing in particular, a little bit of a reset as far as what's important about the sport. And it's community, it's family, it's mothers and daughters and parents spending time together, and just having people slow down and be a little bit more accessible to one another. I think was a benefit, and beyond that, forcing us to sail domestically and not necessarily traveling abroad. And then the Comox story is a phenomenal element of that. But I can't help but point out, as I sit in the freshwater sailing capital of the world, that not only does Canada have the longest coastline in the world, we have also more freshwater lakes than any country in the world. So you hit on why aren't we in more lakes, and that's a great question. That's I won't profess to be able to solve that one in the next 6 months, but that is certainly a focus of mine of how can we make the sport more accessible in more places, and I'm going to say not just in urban centers, as the distribution is loosely around Canada, and I'll say Ontario is a big exception to that because I don't want to take anything away from the cottage clubs up here.
Right, right. How did you get involved with Sail Newfoundland, and what was it like? Yeah, what was it like? How was the 8 years over on the Rock?
So I actually lived there for 10. And I'll say that I walked into a parents' meeting for the race team as a coach and emerged as the president of a nonprofit. and that was a fun time for me. So my professional background after I wrapped up with the Sea Cadet program was largely centered around marine safety, and then subsequently training design after that. So I showed up in Newfoundland and Labrador and ended up on an airplane about 2 weeks later. So I spent a fair bit of time for my first couple of years in the province working on lifeboats for both the oil and gas sector and the cruise line. So I got to see a lot of places. But when I came home, quote unquote, to St. John's, I was always drawn to the club. I just, I couldn't put it down. And I'll be honest with you, David, I moved to St. John's kind of thinking that I was done coaching. I didn't really know what the future of the sport had in store for me. And I think it took about 2 weeks after being back from that first work trip before I found myself racing in the perf fleet, and then got pulled into coaching and fumbled my way into coaching skiffs. And I say fumbled because that wasn't necessarily the plan, not by any means, but there was a group of athletes there that were making their own path towards the Canada Games at that time. That would have been 2011, I think, when I got pulled into skiff coaching. Sorry, and anyway, I got basically roped into it, and then and I had a ton of fun. Getting humbled, quite frankly. I was pretty big into the gym at that point, not necessarily the most agile. So I went out and taught myself how to sail the skiff. I hadn't really had any experience in the boat before, and got decent enough at it, I guess, that we got those two teams to the games. And then along came a 49er a little bit while later, which I ended up owning myself for a bit, which was a ton of fun. That was a Gen 1, so I spent a lot of time swimming next to the boat, more so than sailing at their man. Those Gen 1 rigs were weathered up. But to go back to your question, for me to be working in marine safety and having this professional career off to the side, and then all of a sudden finding myself running a sailing association. At first, naively as a coach, I did look at it as just another association. I looked at it. I was a sail coach. I couldn't turn that part of my brain off. But the professional development that I got from my 8 years at the helm there was phenomenal. Just to zoom out and really take a look at the business of sport, the business of sailing, the business of the boating community, what it is to serve a group of member clubs, and how to grow, and in my case, how to manage my time, because I did have some pretty understanding employers that I'd be at work working on whatever it was, or not working on whatever it was that I should have been with a Sail and L logo on the screen. But it taught me so much about stakeholder management, about dealing with people, about the business side of things. Like I said, yeah, they're really, really fond memories for me. And I think probably my biggest takeaway from it at a leadership development level was stewardship. as leadership. And you'd get the question, what is it that Sail and L does? Are you the governing body, or are you the wagging finger if you're not meeting standards, or what does that really look like? And through a lot of work with myself at the board, and with the Royal Newfoundland Yacht Club, stewardship is where I ended up my focus. And what I mean by stewardship is, the PSAs, the NSOs of the world don't own the sport. We're just a part of it. In many ways, we're the conduit and the intermediary between government funding agencies, between corporate partners, and the actual sailing schools themselves. And so, I took the position of being that diplomat, that intermediary, and kind of that just that voice of reason at times, as far as pulling things back to what really mattered. And it taught me, like I said, taught me a lot. And through all of that, I ended up being the race manager. I ended up being the principal race officer. I ended up being the judge. I ended up running all the perf races and race week for the keel boaters at the club. And it really, it primed me for this role, because I did most of the jobs I think that you can do under the Sail Canada umbrella, albeit not particularly well trained. Because I didn't do the judging course. I didn't really do a lot of the courses for the roles that I took on while at Sail and L. But because I was out there in the middle of the Atlantic by myself, with the community, of course, using icebergs for windward marks, we had to be resourceful and come up with our own solutions. And like I said, it was a ton of fun. I wasn't
Not an exaggeration, by the way. The iceberg is a windward mark, right?
not by any means. No, no. Pretty cool life experiences, to be honest with you. And on the flip side, a whole lot of why am I doing this, when you kick the ice off the lines in late March. No. Anyway, like I said, and doing all of that, like I said, in concert with me supporting the cadet program as well. So I was actually serving both organizations during my time there. So it kept me more than busy, but a ton of life lessons, a ton of business lessons, and a whole lot of perspective on organized sport here in Canada.
Good. I'll have to quickly tell my one sailing time I went sailing or racing in Newfoundland. We went over for the 97 Sail East Regatta. Is probably top one or two regattas of my life. And one of the reasons, beyond Conception Bay being perfect, great wind, like you said about the people at the corner store knowing who you were immediately, like everybody, like it's true. Everyone in Newfoundland is unbelievably friendly and best people on earth. But what really made it special was that on Sunday night, we couldn't leave until Monday morning because we were all taking the ferry from Argentia, which didn't leave till Monday morning. So that left Sunday night, where most people after a regatta are like tying up and getting out of town. We hung out and partied. Like it was amazing. And like all these people you get really close with, you travel around, but you never, you're an athlete, so you're not really supposed to be, partying and stuff. But this was, fair game. Sunday night, can't leave till Monday. We're getting on a ferry. And it was just a great time. So shout out to Newfoundland and all the people and all the sailing that happens there for sure.
And I'll say shout out in advance of the Canada Summer Games next year. It is, to your point, it is worth the trip. I don't think it's appropriate for me to hype the partying in this pitch, but I will say that, to your point, the St. John's. I mean, St. John's is where I lived, and they're always happy to see people come and enjoy CBS, as we call it. I think it's going to be a phenomenal event, and I'm glad to hear that that's a core memory for you.
Yeah, for sure. And then you came back to Halifax and spending some time there before you got your new gig. Like what were you up to there, and what how do you spend your time in Halifax?
Well, the first little while I was still working for my employer back in St. John's. So, but what to do with my spare time was certainly a question. I wasn't used to that after Sail and L wasn't on my desk anymore. So I fell in love with the Blue Nose, and I don't mean the tall ship, although I did crew on the Blue Nose for a couple months, a long time ago. But the Blue Nose fleet down in Chester is where I really fell in love with one design racing again. And David, I'll be honest with you, my last real regatta was when I was 18. You know, I didn't the way that I came up through my program, the cadet program. There was no racing for adults, quite frankly. So I remember my last cadet national regatta at the age of 18. I was one of the last boats to make it back to the beach after the last race because I knew I was done. I knew I didn't see a pathway for myself to the Olympics. I'm by no means genetically gifted. I'm way too big to be a 470 sailor and not fit enough to be an Oakland sailor. So what are you going to do? And Anyway, to launch into that Blue Nose fleet down in Chester was a ton of fun. It's a super deep fleet, and I think it's such a hidden gem. And I say hidden gem because I think a lot of Canadians don't realize that some of the best one design racing in Canada is happening at little old Chester Yacht Club. I mean, there's not a whole lot of infrastructure. It's a bunch of mooring balls and a really dedicated group of sailors who are out there 3 days a week. So that was a ton of fun for me to dive into. And then along came Bella J, which, for those who are familiar with the program, Bella J used to be in Newfoundland and Labrador. It was at the Royal Newfoundland Club. And after I left town, Ray brought the boat up to Nova Scotia and threw Simon Reese and I the keys and told us to build an offshore program, which was quite the project. I'm not going to lie. It was fun for me as a dinghy sailor who hadn't really done a whole lot of keelboat sailing to take a look at the sport in another light. As far as offshore and what it means to campaign, what it means to run a project, what it means to be a boat boss, what it means to do all the logistics pieces and then train up a crew. And one of our goals between Simon and I was to A, focus on youth development and B, to have gender parity in the program. And I want to say that we overshot on gender parity. I think it's probably 70-30 at this point. And I'm the second oldest guy on the boat, notwithstanding Ray, which is humbling for me at times. But through Sarah Nicholson, who's over in Holland right now on an internship, through Grace Fleming, and those two crewed the boat down to the Caribbean last winter. I think they logged like 7,000 miles or something foolish like that between the two of them. And for myself, I did Newport, Bermuda in 22, Antigua to Bermuda in 23, and then Marblehead a couple of weeks after, which was probably the coldest and wettest that I think I've ever been offshore.
Uh-huh.
And I'm on deck to do Newport, Bermuda with the program again this coming June. So yeah, it's been such a cool way for me to step out from buoy racing and like I said, find another element of the sport and one that, it scratches the itch for me at a high performance level. What it means to be competitive, not for an hour or not for an afternoon, but for days at a time, and just kind of keeping that drive and that focus to trim the sail, to do the sail changes. And, I sail Bella J in the same way that I sailed the 49er. You give me the main sheet, my job is to make the boat go fast. And I really sunk my teeth into that. I still am not the best navigator, not by any means, but I think that's my favorite part about this facet of the sport is there's so much more to learn. And, I'll make the distinction between being an athlete in the dinghy space versus being a sailor in the offshore space, and not at all to separate the two too much, but there's definitely some different seamanship skills that you need when you're 200 miles offshore as opposed to when you're sailing in the pond. So yeah, it's just a different approach to the sport and one that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, certainly the offshore space is somewhere that I've had feedback about the podcast that is growth, and there are people that are very interested in Canada, even though it's not kind of what we're known for or what the media, the sailing media, is focused on with the dinghies and stuff. From Scott Scheuer, who I had on trying to do the Avonde, and Melody Schaefer, who was the yachts person of the year, and then just recently with the Femina challenge to do the Quebec Saint-Malo. So yeah, it's definitely a growth area for our sport, and something that people are interested in too, I think.
Yeah, offshore sailing, distance sailing for my freshwater friends. I think it's a really underserved market in Canada, and it's one that I see a lot of potential for growth. So for me, sitting in this chair now in Sail Canada, I've already met with the offshore committee and taken a look at what the training standards and the opportunities are, and ways for us to help more Canadians, more sailors in the sport get on the water with the right tools and do so in a safe way. So yeah, it's a sector that I really I want to support personally. I don't want to put too much work on the team here in the Kingston office, but we'll call it a pet project of mine and one that I definitely want to foster and elevate that market because I see that as a huge branch for professional sailing and kind of that next
Mm,
level for sailors that come up through and want to make a career of it, want to make a go of it. Seeing Coralie now make the shift from Olympic pathway to sailing across the Atlantic. I don't know if that's going to be a full time venture for her or not. I don't want to speak for her, but just the fact that she's able to step into that program and send it is awesome to
yeah.
see. And I hope more sailors coming up through the program take advantage of things like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's Coralie Vidicok for those listening at home, and she was Ilka 6 campaign for the longest time, best hiking form I've ever seen in pictures, and then did the NACA 17, and now she's like you say, doing this transatlantic race. So, and I know that when you were back there, you did some coaching, or you continue to do coaching, and I think you might even worked with my son a little bit here and there in the skiffs. This my next section is what I call hijack the guest, where I ask the guest to help me out with something that I'm particularly working on, and this is going to be a little bit skewed since we're not really talking about my racing or anything like that, but something that I have an issue with or think about a lot is how sailors who become coaches, 16, 17, 18, we kind of lose them from the sport in a way, from racing. Like you see this, right? Like kids, and that becomes their full-time job, and then maybe it's they don't want they. For me, I think it's having tried to do it myself. It's that it's hard to get out sailing at 5 o'clock if you've been sitting there on the water all day long with kids and coaching them and stuff. And then everything kind of changes when you're 18. You're interested in different things, going to university, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about how to keep these younger people, 16, 17, 18, who have just become coaches, to keep racing, keep being involved in actually sailing, not just coaching.
It's a great question, one for the ages. I'm going to say I think there's been a lot of people that have sat in this chair in particular that have pondered that one, and it's a multifaceted answer that I have to give here today. So for one, I do see a lot of benefit for us to take a look across the border and see what the Americans are doing with both high school and collegiate sailing. And well, this is my report card now. I'm starting to have some early conversations with those groups just as far as how we can foster that. And staying in the dinghy pathway and kind of the yacht club model is one thing, but you're not going to get match racing. You're not going to get team sailing. You're not going to get a lot of the real slow boat handling skills in a normal sailing school environment that the high school and the collegiate programs are offering today. And I think there's a lot of room for us to work with universities and schools and athletic directors in academia to try to elevate where the sport is and what I'll call the institutions, and where a lot of other sports have a lot of traction and have sport growth opportunities in other sports. So that's one thing. The other side of it being, there is a focus on racing, and there needs to be, and I don't want to have any Olympic coaches mad at me because I tell people not to specialize, but there is a bit more to sailing than just racing, and I think that we can lose sight of just going on the water and having fun. And I see so many new elements of the sport coming in, be that kite foiling, be that the foiling boards, be that wing sailing, be that sport boats, which are becoming cheaper and a lot more accessible, and just the joy of going for a sail around the harbor, but while still learning, still being deliberate. And I can't help but flex my learning design brain, if only for a moment. Formal learning only accounts for about 10% of the learning process. 90% of it is informal, which is to say 90% of how you learn how to sail, how you learn how to kick a ball, how you learn how to do anything comes through play. It comes through trial and error. It comes through experience and just getting on the water. So, for anyone, if they're tired and they don't want to go for a race after working all day, I get that. But I do think that clubs and people can invest in some of these really cheap ways to get on the water and just go play around for an evening. I see absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I would encourage, quite frankly, your kind of hardcore racer to also stop and smell the roses, if you will, and get on a sup, go on a wasp, and go for a swim. Try wing foiling, and as far as that connection back to family, because we chatted about that earlier. I see a huge benefit and opportunity for sport boat owners. People with a young family who don't necessarily have the means or the interest in getting a full-on cruising boat, to get something small like an 18 or a 22 footer, and something with stability, and something that's fun to bring the entire family out, and also cheap enough that you also don't mind throwing the tiller to an 18-year-old to go have a go with it. So yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot of great opportunities that we can do formally, but equally so, those informal play opportunities are ones that I think we need to foster and celebrate as well.
Absolutely. No, I like that. I like that answer. Collegiate sailing is growing in the country, which is awesome. And then, well, yeah, just yeah, you don't have to race necessarily. Just adventure sailing programs are huge.
Now, you mentioned adventure sailing, but I do want to take a moment for that as well, because
Sure.
there, it does seem like it's something that clubs are a little bit, I don't want to say afraid to, but hesitant to really embrace chartering. One of the biggest questions that I get now, and I've always gotten, is how do I go for a sail? I sailed when I was a kid. I haven't touched it in a long time. How do I get on the water? And right now, the real answer for most people is to grab a life jacket, go down on a Wednesday, and hope you find your way onto someone's keelboat. And I think that there's a huge market opportunity for clubs all over the place to make a few bucks on their club fleet. Have the right waiver in place, have something in place legally and on an insurance standpoint. But I think there's a lot of quote unquote former sailors who would love to just go for a sail, if only for a night. Not a big investment, but they want to go on that adventure sail. And I think teenagers in particular, same thing. That's an age group where being in a structured environment is one that they inherently resist. So I do think that there's a huge rec market, particularly for high school students who don't necessarily want to go hardcore into team racing or match racing, who could still very much benefit by spending an afternoon on the water in a safe and controlled environment. But I think adventure sailing is one that we've kind of under promoted as a community. And for Sail Canada, I don't really know what that looks like for us at a programming level just yet. I'm only 2 months in, but it is on my
Yeah.
mind, just as far as how we can celebrate some best practices. Because, like I said, I do think it's an untapped market and a real opportunity to get more Canadians on the water.
Definitely. And there's so many pathways for into the sport, and you come last in 20 regattas and all of a sudden you're first, or you get forced to race by your parents or whatever, but then you get out of it, go sailing by yourself. Like a lot of stories like this where they tried to do it, even and then they go out in the cottage on a boat, and then all of a sudden now it clicked. Now they're
Yeah.
13 and it clicked. When it was 8, when they were 8 and 10, it was just annoying, and all of a sudden something clicked. So you've been only 2 months on the job now. How are you fitting in? How are you fitting in? How is it going? How do you like it? How do you not like it? What's going on at Sail
Uh,
Canada?
I hope I'm fitting in well. The staff haven't drove me out of the building yet. Um, no, it's been quite the learning curve. I'm sure you can appreciate. I've never worked in an NSO per se before, and I think that's kind of forgotten in the multi-sport world, that a lot of NSO CEOs will go from one opportunity to the next and kind of hang out in that level. So I think it's a bit rare, from what I understand, for a random East Coaster to hop in the car and drive drive to Ontario and start a new role. So it's been a lot of perspective building for me. Yes, I was the president of Sail and L, and yes, I've been coaching for a long time, and I have a lot of insights on how sailing works. But to really see how the national sport infrastructure works and all the various entities and stakeholder groups, it's been fascinating for me, quite frankly, to kind of look under the hood and see how it all works. And it's been fun for me, David, to really take a look at what does it mean for success for me, and I've got that performance mindset. So what are my metrics, and how can I measure my own success, and what does the success of Sail Canada as an NSO look like while serving the association? And that's the fun part, right? We're not in this for ourselves, not by any means. Our role here is to serve our members. And the way that I've been centering my thoughts 2 months in is what's a healthy sport? How do we measure that? What does that really look like for Canada? And a stat that I can't get out of my brain is that we've increased the population in Canada by around 10 million in the last 10 years, give or take. And yet the growth of sailing has been more or less flat. So how do we reconcile that? What is it that we can do as member clubs to open our doors and reach out to the community and really kind of bring people in and usher new participants into the sport who probably wouldn't have viewed themselves as sailors had someone not tapped them on the shoulder and said, "Hey, come on down." So my vision, my goal for all of this fundamentally is empty marinas and full boat parks. That's what I want, and that's not for me to ask of any one commodore or club manager, but I think ideally, if clubs that are firing on all cylinders ought to have boats out of the marina and ought to have dinghy sailors in the boat park, not 5 days a week and not for 2 months of the year, but 7 days a week, 6 months of the year. That to me is what success looks like. Insofar as I think if we talk about how to get more high schoolers and more youth on the water, that's May, June, September, October, and that's when a lot of programs are just waking up for the season. But I think I think for a lot of those who aren't fully converted just yet, that's our sweet spot. And in October and September in particular, that's when the water's warmest. That's when we want to be exposing people to the sport for the first time. We can't forget the Canadian cold water factor here.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so what doesn't it, how do we work together as a community to leverage the IP, the intellectual property and prowess that we have? Again, this is a long-standing organization and an association full of people that are really passionate about the sport. So how do I leverage all of these eager hearts and minds while sitting in my chair to build programs and build partnerships with member clubs to really propel the sport forward is what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I don't profess to have all the answers just yet, but a lot of conversations and a lot of calls with some really passionate people. And like I said, I'm taking a lot away from every encounter that I have and really building out our plan for the future.
You certainly have taken over at a time of great activity in the sport. We've got the Olympics coming up.
The Olympics are going to be a phenomenal opportunity for Sarah Douglas, for Antonia and Georgia, to hopefully medal. And I think that they have the chops, and they've done the work to get there. Obviously, it's sport, and so it can be both beautiful and brutal at the same time. And who knows who will actually end up coming out on top. And in my mind, an Olympic medal is a happy byproduct of making it to that level. Canada, we really are stepping into our own in events all around the world. So I'm a supporting character here, and yeah, I'm trying to do my best to give our high performance team and all those various programs whatever support systems they need.
Excellent. It's funny that thing about the Olympics and the byproduct being the medal, like because when you talk to athletes or anyone really, we're all trying to do process over performance, right? It's like you know uh, for me, like I should say, last summer, I learned so much about downwind sailing in that for that event, and then I went to a big regatta in Newport, and that was my goal in the regatta was to sail the waves and learn to sail downwind and everything. So my goal, and like no one passed me downwind, so that was my goal. I like got better at downwind, but I was friggin' like 40th out of 60, and that was not didn't make me happy. But I really do feel like point being, the one place where they can't say or that performance really is over process when we come down to the Olympics. And it's an unfortunate thing. And it's like you say, the sport, and it's the beauty of our sport that we don't know what the conditions are going to be or anything. And it's unfortunate for them in a lot of ways too. But like, unfortunately, you're going to be judged forever and ever by where you finish, I think.
Yeah, that high performance mindset is so tough to self manage and auto regulate. I mean, at the end of the day, when we zoom out, we're just playing a game. We're just
Yeah.
going on the water and playing around in boats and racing. And but on the flip side, you look at the 8, 12, 20 years that it takes to get that good. And as an athlete, to really able to piece everything together, from nutrition, from rest, to the finances, to the project and campaign management, never mind being able to sail, never mind being able to race, never mind being able to fleet manage at that caliber. There's so many things that you need to do right, and to really have all those stars align for you. And I've never sailed at that level, so I'm not professing to know what it takes to win at the games. But that high performance mindset of sailing to win matters, right? How to really show up and say, you know what, I deserve to be here. I've done the work. I'm competitive, and I'm here to win. But also being okay with the outcome if you don't. And there's a wellness component to that, a sports psychology component to that, of actually scenario planning, and it's a very healthy process in advance of an athlete to say, all right, well, if I win, what does that look like? If I come mid fleet, what does that look like? And if I come last, what does that look like? And as I say, for practitioners in that space, and I'm not a psychologist by any means, but there's a very healthy prep that can go into the games to say, if I do come last, I'll be okay. And I think for me in this role, and never mind in South Canada, but the entire sailing community, of being welcoming of athletes when they come back, no matter the result, and say, let's just go for a sail. And you want to take a time out before getting back on the campaign trail and hiking and being in Europe, then take a year, or dive right back into it, whatever you feel that you need in your process coming out of the games. Because win or lose, there's going to be this massive what's next question when people come back from Paris. And there's a lot of highs and lows with that, as I understand it. But all the same, like I said, for us getting there, the focus right now for me and for the high performance team at South Canada is to really make sure that the athletes have everything that they need to be successful in their own right. And I'm really happy to be a part of that.
Yep, that is a big issue. That kind of post games, or even professional athletes, when you retire, like, it can be very depressing. But let's move on to my three big questions. The first one is, Ryan, what do you love about sailing?
I love that. I love that moment of pause when you push off from the dock. I just love kind of leaving it all behind. And it's the same feeling for me. It doesn't matter if you're in a dinghy, if you're in a big keelboat, if you're going out for a race, or if you're just going out for a sail around the island. That I don't want to call it escapism, because I don't think that's really what it is. But that feeling of being away from land, in the elements, and really enjoying nature. And when you really dial it all back to what the sport's all about, we harness nature. How awesome is that? And sailing, I like to think, is pretty unique insofar as, at the end of the day, we're driving vehicles on the ocean. Like, who else gets to do that? Um, and it's also so accessible, and I think that we can forget that too. Just as far as people who want to get out and get on the water, I mean, if you're a paraplegic, we have options. And what other place can we put a quadriplegic, sorry, on a water or on the water in a boat, and use that sip and blow technology, and give people a level of freedom that they wouldn't have otherwise. I think it's such a beautiful thing. So you asked me what I love about sailing, in where I'm sitting right now. My passion, true passion, is to create opportunities to get people on the water, and to be a part of that journey for people is so inspiring, and I see it as such a privilege. And for me in particular, I'm still as addicted to the sport as I was when I found it when I was a teenager. And yeah, you mentioned the conditions piece earlier, and nature can bite back sometimes. And some days you go out and the wind dies and there's not a whole lot to do, and then sometimes you go out and it picks up to 30, 35 and you get smoked. And that's the beauty of it, is I think it's so dynamic, and it can really be whatever you want it to be, and it can change and evolve over time. But at the end of the day, this is a community-based sport, and it's a lifestyle sport, and it's one worth celebrating.
Great answer. Second big question. What in your sailing journey so far are you most proud of?
Oh, I wish I could be proud of things. I I take little solace in previous accomplishments, and I wish that I did. Quite frankly, I'm so kind of task oriented that I think sometimes even before I finished a race, I'm already thinking about the next one. So am I proud of some of the things that I've done? Absolutely. I we talk about the cadet program. I think I personally have taught. I'm going to pick a number, 7,000 kids had attack. It could be a little higher, could be a little lower, but it's up in that range, and so I do feel as though I've made an impact in my own right, just as far as bringing the sport to other people. But for my own piece, doing Antigua to Bermuda last year was a big deal. That was 1,000 miles, 7 days. That was a fun race to be in. But on the flip side, I also feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what I want to do in this sport. And yes, I'm in this chair, but I still have a life jacket in the trunk, and there's plenty of experiences that I want to go chase.
I like that. Last big question. What kind of advice would you give to sailors who want to improve, who want to reach their goals, be them racing or cruising or whatever it might be?
So I'll focus on the dinghy and the athlete side first because I think that's a bit of a two-parter. But my answer is do the laps. Do the laps. If you want to be an athlete in this space, it means doing work. And I do find that there is a bit of a tendency for athletes across the country to be in a hurry to go campaign in Europe and go get some of that big fleet experience. And I don't want to take away from that stuff at all, not by any means. But as you mentioned earlier, it's a pretty dynamic sport, and the conditions can change. And I think there's a lot of benefit in building a program and building a training squad and building a relationship with a good training partner and training in your own club, in your own backyard, and really spending the time, quote unquote, doing the laps. And not just two, but 10, but 20, and doing two-a-days. There's, yes, we need to recover, and yes, we need to go to the gym, and yes, we need to do all these things. But you can see such growth and resilience, quite frankly, in hitting the water in the morning and spending 2-3 hours just doing short track laps and sweating, and really going through the paces. Come back for lunch, grab a sandwich, and then go and do a big rip. And do some speed testing. But I'm of the opinion as a coach that you have to earn those distance sails. You gotta spend the time luffing. You gotta spend the time doing the double tacks and really duking it out on the start line, or just doing the figure eights and really dialing the footwork in. And like I said, I think those are opportunities and experiences that you can have at home, or with the right training partner somewhere in Canada, as opposed to heading overseas when it's not really worth the investment. And again, I'm not taking anything away from those that want to go do a youth worlds or anything to that effect. If you make it to that level, I absolutely think that you should take those opportunities. But on the flip side, there's also some economics at play with running a campaign, and I think spending the time at home with the right coach and with the right training partner is worth doing.
I love that.
Thank
No,
you.
I just
Thank you.
that's a great. I go out and do short courses until you're dizzy.
Yeah.
You'll do everything you need to do during a race like 100 times.
On the cruising side, it can be intimidating. And I think that we can forget that if we've been around the sport and around a marina for a long time, that, it's getting the boat out of the slip in one piece, never mind back in, can be a big challenge for people. So yeah, as far as people who are considering entering in the world of cruising and want to go enjoy the sport in a recreational context, I would say, for one, take a course. And that's not a self-promotion, not by any means, but between ourselves and equally so with the Canadian Power Sail Squadron, there's a lot of great resources in Canada about how to enjoy the water in a safe way. And then beyond that, I think that beyond what a participant can do or a would-be sailor can do, I would actually put it back to the sailing community to be welcoming, and to pass on the stories and the knowledge, and giving people a heads up before they're about to do something expensive. There is a wealth of knowledge for sailing in Canada, and I think that we can serve ourselves to grow the community. I don't want to be accusatory, but by being a little bit more forthcoming with some experiences and just giving people a helping hand, even if it's just catching a dock line and having a quick chat about the day. So I do think, as I said, it's a bit of a two-parter. One, if you're going to make the investment to buy a cruising boat, do a little bit of homework in advance. But equally so, I would call upon the sailing community to be a good neighbor.
Excellent. Ryan Kelly, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, Dave. As I said, I've been listening and watching for quite some time, and you've had some heavy hitting guests on the show. So to make the roster means a lot. So thank you for your time, quite frankly, and for being such a strong advocate and champion for organized sailing. No, I see you grimacing there. Do me a favor, sir, and take the compliment. No, it's been fun watching the podcast grow, and I really enjoy listening to you and the guests that you've had on.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. So, until next time, remember to have fun, make friends, and sail fast. I'll see you on the water.